All right, welcome, folks. So this is a first special episode of Somebody Asked Me with Janice case around the current crisis that we're all dealing with, that is COVID-19. And we are at the start of basically week 3 for most of us across the country, depending on where you are, in being quarantined, not quarantined, sorry, wrong word. We're all still getting used to the language, in being asked to practice social distance and to stay and to self-isolate, to stay in our homes as much as possible, except for needing to go out for groceries or what have you. So as educators, we've been watching, right? We've been watching and absorbing all of the news and the information and the stories and the frustrations. And recently I had a conversation with some educator friends, and we realized, there's a lot that we can offer, right, to, especially in this case of this episode, parents out there, because suddenly parents have been thrust into the role of educator, and yet it's so much more complex than that. So on the line with me today, I have 3 educators, Rebecca and Meredith and Cheryl, and they're going to all introduce themselves here in a moment. But in a recent conversation, what we talked about was, what can we offer to parents right now at the start of week 3? Because what we can offer to them at the start of week 6 could be very different, right? At the start of week 3, we see most schools around the country that have been closed for at least a week to 2 weeks. We see some districts moving faster than others to get distance learning up and running, which is a whole different set of challenges. But what we see consistently is parents at home with kids trying to figure out what the heck to do with them, right? So I asked these 3 wonderful educators to join me today, and this might be the only COVID-19 special episode of this podcast. It might be the first of many. I don't know. We're really going to play this by ear, and these episodes are only going to air if we feel like they could be of benefit as we add them to the conversation that's happening all around us. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is kind of just share really quickly 3 big buckets, if you will, of information that we're going to talk about this morning. And then I'm going to ask our 3 guests to introduce themselves, and then we're going to launch in. So parents, first and foremost, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how you can continue to promote your child's kind of building of their capacity to be metacognitive in their learning. And that sounds really complicated, and many of you are going, what the heck, Janice? I thought this was going to be feel good. Trust me, it's still going to be feel good. That's just a fancy education term that we're about to define, and essentially it's all about how you're questioning their kids about thinking, so we'll get to that. The second big bucket is going to be how we are engaging our kids around this crisis, right? Because you are the only people, aside from their friends and whoever they're accessing on virtual hangouts, etc. But you're the people of kind of authority, if you will, in their space right now. And they're getting information from all over the place. So how we can engage our kids around the crisis. And then lastly, this idea of empowerment, how we are empowering our kids around their learning right now as they sit at home for the start of at least the 3rd week. So that's what we're going to cover for you in the next few minutes. And I'm going to start out by asking our guests to introduce themselves. Meredith, go for it.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Meredith. I am an educator at the secondary level. I've been teaching high school English for 15 years. I am also our school site's instructional coach. So I work with teachers as well as students. And I'm also a parent. I have a total of 5 children, but that's a blended family. I have 2 biological children, though. My son is a freshman in college, and my daughter is a senior right now in high school. So she is of the class of 2020.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Okay. And that is, what I love about even just the act of introducing is the reality of how much the same we all are right now, right? Because a lot of us are parents at home with seniors who were also trying to support the emotional duress that comes with their entire senior year experience really being completely changed overnight. And among those parents are teachers, right? So anyway, Cheryl, let's hear it.
My name is Cheryl. Good morning. I am also a secondary teacher. I am a teacher of social studies and have been for over 25 years. I'm also the mother of 3 grown children and 3 small grandsons. So I have various generations with which I am dealing during this crisis.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we're going to come back at the end of the episode, because I already warned these guys that my last question is going to be, so what are you doing for your own families right now, right? And what can we take from that as a result? All right, Miss Rebecca, let's hear it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca. I've been an educator for 17 years now, also all at the secondary level. I was a high school administrator, and my home life is a little different because I am just living with someone who's of an age where they're highly susceptible to the virus. But we do have two grandchildren who are far, far away that we're trying to support mom with some engaging home activities for her daughters.
Nice. Thank you. And that's another important piece for all of us to recognize, right? And I've seen lots of really wonderful posts about first responders. I've seen wonderful posts about teachers. But this idea that so many of us are playing two roles. It's not like we thrust all of our parents into the role of teacher and said, and by the way, you can put everything else on hold. We said, do everything you've always done, except stay at home to do it and figure that out. And oh, by the way, now help your kids learn, right? So it's fantastic, really, is what it is. It's certainly not a recipe for disaster by any stretch, as we're going to demonstrate this morning. So with that in mind, let's jump right into that that first bucket. And so with the first bucket, folks, ladies, what I think I want you to do, and I'm going to start with you, Meredith, if that's okay, is I want you to go ahead and first and foremost, we're going to talk about metacognition, right? What is this thing that is metacognition that we are working really hard with kids at school? And why is it going to be something that's going to be great for parents to address at home? And I think, ladies, because there are three of us on the virtual, I'm going to ask if you're not speaking to mute. That way we make sure we're not getting any background noise. And yes, we're being that transparent on this podcast, right? All right, Meredith, talk to us about metacognition.
Sure. So in my experience as an English teacher, and with the, introduction of Common Core, and getting students to reach that deep level of critical thinking, I find that it's very important, at least in my classroom, to get kids to have conversations with each other about whatever the topic is that we're discussing, but more so than that, to get them to think about why they think that way and to really kind of stop and reflect on what they actually know, how they know it, and why do they believe it. Too often I see kids just trying to give an answer, like a textbook answer to something, but now in the system we're trying to get kids to really think about the why and how did you come to that answer and why do you think that, and so in saying that, especially in English, but I also know in all the other contents too, we've incorporated a lot of reflection time to think about what they actually are learning, what they know. And this is critical also. I know I'm just going to speak for math, even though I don't know math, but I know a lot of the struggle these days in high school is with the level of math that kids are doing. And oftentimes our colleagues it's hard to get kids to understand that point of confusion where they don't know how to go any further. And so tracing them back into what they do know is a critical piece of helping them move to the next level.
Okay.
So I think that's where we're at in terms of getting them to think about what they think.
Okay. So that's a really great way to help parents understand what metacognition is and to highlight a couple of things that you said. You said it's really to get them to think about what they're thinking and then why, right? And you went on to say, so think about what you think you know, and then can you explain why you think that? Because if you can, it's also going to help flesh out sources, right? What are the sources of information you're using to determine what you think you know, and to build off of that. So Cheryl, I'm going to come to you next. Then I'd love to hear. So that's one thing, and Meredith gave us some examples of at school, right? Depending on the different content areas you use. So now let's think about at home, right? So I'm with my kids at home. What are some of the things that are happening in their day-to-day lives, right, that I can be asking these types of questions around?
I think that, Meredith did an excellent job of explaining that, but also that's an intimidating task.
Yeah.
To try to, it doesn't have to be as heady and philosophical as it might be in a classroom when you're dealing with your kids at home. I think that if you are constantly, as a parent, trying to ask open-ended questions of your students so that it's not a yes or a no. And you take something specific, a movie perhaps that your student is watching or you're going to watch together, and have a discussion about that. And it could even, and it doesn't have to be a quality movie. It's a movie for entertainment. And you could ask, why do you think they made this movie? Why would a director put money, or producers put money into this movie? To what audience is it intended? Do you think it was well received? Should we look that up and look at reviews? What evidence, as your child answers you, what made you believe that when you were watching the movie? What made you think that? And you can avoid words like evidence. And as a historian, I can't.
Sure.
I have to always evidence. But you can do that, and it's kind of a fun thing. It challenges, it takes a very passive experience of watching a movie and deepens it so that the child is actually engaging with it on a different level. Yeah. And at the same time, the benefit is that you're also having a conversation that isn't parent-child.
Yeah.
It's more person to person, which we are also in desperate need of at this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so important, Cheryl, because you're getting at a couple of different factors. Right there at the end, you're getting at isolation, right? So we're all at home, hopefully, at the very least, with at least one other person in our home. And even if we have that one other person, we can feel very isolated, right? I know that our kids are spending a lot of time in their own space, working on schoolwork, working on whatever, but they are still in their own space. And I love that you pointed out that it doesn't have to be an educational movie, right? We're not asking you to go find a documentary and start the battle of, now we're going to watch this together, whether you like it or not. We're saying you could be watching The Emperor's New Groove, which we just watched, which is why it's fresh on my mind. And you can be asking those same questions, because any movie, right? There's those questions, there are going to be answers to those questions. And I love that you focused on the person to person, right? It's not okay, I'm going to put on my educator hat now, guys, because I feel like it's important for us all to learn. It's a casual exchange of those kinds of questions. So Rebecca, I'm going to come to you and ask anything you would add to what Cheryl said, first off, or Meredith, it can go either way. Anything you would add to what Cheryl said, and or any other examples you would offer. So Cheryl gave us a very specific example of watching a movie, right? We're just going to watch a movie together, and we're going to have these kinds of conversations and really get them thinking beyond what happened, but why do you think it happened? Why do you think the director wanted that to be a part of it, etc.? Anything else you would add to that?
Well, I think it was really well said, and I love that example.
Yeah.
One thing that for the younger ones I've seen a lot of is do the same thing when you're reading to your kids. What books are you reading to them? Are you asking them why they think that picture illustrates the book? If you were to illustrate it, what would it look differently? What do you think's gonna, the simple, what do you think's gonna happen next?
Yeah.
Things like that. The other thing that some principals are doing, if you have elementary level kids, is they are reading to their kids on Facebook.
I love that.
On Facebook Live.
Yeah.
So if people haven't hooked into that yet, I'd highly recommend hooking into Facebook Live at the school site to listen to the principals, and or stars are reading books too. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
But anyway, just again, that kind of interactive, whatever you're doing, whether it's the TV or reading a book or what have you, just talk and have conversation, I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I love that you took it to some of those examples. And, I'm always trying to be 100% transparent. And in our conversation around this podcast, we wondered, do we need one more thing for people to listen to as a resource, right? Because there is a lot out there right now. And what we settled on is that there is a lot, but especially on social media, because your question's quite right. Have you seen it, right? Because just because we're seeing stuff doesn't mean everybody sees the same stuff. And it certainly doesn't mean people are landing on it, right? And stopping and watching and listening. So tons of resources out there. The goal is for this to be one more resource. So let's talk a little bit then about that second bucket of how parents can help put this crisis in perspective for their kids. Now, my disclaimer is none of us, as you heard in our introductions, are counselors. This is not a therapy session. This is simply, again, from an education perspective, what can you be thinking about, right, with respect to how your kids understand this crisis? They are getting information from all kinds of sources, some of which parents we are very kind of familiar with. We know because we can see them watching whatever the news or whatever it is. Some of it not, because my kids spend time alone in their room with their devices. That's just the truth of it. So so I'm going to have to ask questions to even figure out what their sources are. But I'll put it out there. And Cheryl, I'm going to start with you and then ask Meredith and Rebecca to pipe in. So how do you think, and I'm starting with you because you're the history teacher. I keep telling my own 12-year-old, by the way, history is being made right now, right? Your children are probably going to read about this in history books. And I think I even manipulated her into starting a daily journal for that. And I did say manipulate. That's exactly the word I used because I said that's going to be somebody said this online. That'll be your primary source one day, right? So, so we'll see if she'll actually follow through with it. But when you think in terms of a crisis like this, that is of historical magnitude, right? How can parents be thinking about how they engage their kids to talk about the crisis itself?
Well, it's interesting because I pushed out a journal PowerPoint to all of my students on day 2 once the schools were closed. In conjunction with English teachers, we were all trying to get the students to interact with what is happening because it has never happened before.
Yeah.
The Spanish flu in 1918, God help us, we hope that's not what this is going to be when millions died, but it's something that the people alive today have never experienced.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, we have to validate that with our kids to say, I don't know, because nobody knows what's going to happen, how it's going to, and I think we bring our kids in with that. So if you can get your kids to journal, I have students, I ask them, you can share with me or not share with me. It's all up to you. I'll respond if you want to share. I had some pretty tear-jerking entries from some of my students. Kids are scared. I think that now we're settling into maybe a more normal, this is the new normal, and some boredom and other things are setting in. I think what we have to do, as I said before, is I think we have to validate it's never happened before.
Yeah.
That it and not discount or try. And me as a historian, I'm always looking for, this crisis in the past. I think the only thing that we can really gather from the past, in my estimation, is the strength of your own family values, whatever it is you hold dear. And then us as the American people, I'm a big advocate of America, and our strength is in our people and in our values as a people. And we've met other crises head on. As a historian, I would tell my own kids, look at the Depression, look at World War II. This is unique, and we are now rising up. Now's our time to be able to call on those values that are, I believe, in the American DNA. Yeah. We can do this.
Thank you. I love that. Meredith and Rebecca, what would you add?
I would, concur obviously with everything Cheryl said. I would add to my own students, to my own children, that this is an opportunity for them to have a powerful voice in the writing of their own history. Like Cheryl mentioned, the journal assignment I pushed out to my students as well. She has 11th grade U.S. history. I have 11th grade American Lit. So we share a lot of the same kids. And just kind of reiterating the fact that, and again, I teach English kids. The minute you say we're going to write, everyone's like, oh gosh. But it's in the approach of, think about 20 years from now when you dig this up and you go back and maybe you have kids then, or maybe you've long forgotten or whatever, you'll have this documentation of your voice at that time in this unique situation of being a high school student where the schools got closed down, where it was changed and it was different. And while you think right now you'll never forget it, trust me, you will forget some of the details of it. So
Absolutely.
The documenting of it is a really powerful thing. So And nowadays too, like with my own kids, they don't even have to write. It can be audio. It can be creative. It can, do whatever you want to do. And again, this is all under the umbrella of learning. This is still, as a parent, I keep telling my own children, like, just jot this down. This is powerful learning that you're in the middle of. And it doesn't have to be open up a textbook or open up a literature, a novel, and read and write it doesn't have to be that. It's still very relevant, and it's important.
Yeah.
And I think they'll appreciate it later.
I'd like to chime in on that piece of for students, that this is such an unprecedented time that we've shut down our schools and that they can be primary sources of history at this point. And I would like to add that I feel like parents of young children, or parents of any children, can do the same thing,
Absolutely.
right? Like, you can write at 5 minutes at the end of your day or in the middle of your day or what have you. I mean, I have a cousin who has 2 very little children who will not remember this.
Yeah.
Right? And so why not, as a parent, do a little reflection, write a little note, do something so that you remember, and maybe some of the details you don't really want to remember, but, so that you have that also and you can share with them. This is what we did my cousin brought her baby home 2 weeks ago. At the very beginning, the middle of the beginning of all of this, she had a baby.
Right.
Right? And no one has seen that child,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Except for her and her husband. That's it.
Yep.
And so some of those important milestones, I have another friend whose baby's going to start the walking milestone and all that, and no one's going to be there to share that with them.
Yeah.
So to Meredith's point, whether it's on a video or however you want to document that, but sometimes it's just for your kids to know your true feelings of what was happening then, I think would be also valuable as a parent. So.
Well, and I think that what you guys have done is, and we're kind of, extending into that third topic around empowerment. But what I appreciate about the combination of your comments is that you're talking about how we can encourage kids learning in a lot of different ways. And in the way you're talking about right now is through just absolutely documenting their experience. And I love that you're expanding it from writing to video, right? They have so many forums now that they can use. It can be a video documentary or a video journal or what have you. But then you're also getting into modeling, right? So not just telling our kids or encouraging our kids to do it, but modeling, doing it ourselves for the same purposes that you're saying, Rebecca, right? My experience as an adult and a mom and an educator, etc., going through this is different than my kids' experience, right? Because there are some things I'm aware of and I know and I'm experiencing that they aren't because they're kids, right? So I think that's really a key piece. And I want to go back and kind of just put a cap on the conversation about how we're navigating the crisis and really reinforce what you said. And Cheryl, you mentioned in that first journal entry, the responses you got from kids, that for parents, I really want to reinforce that if you haven't had a very specific conversation with your kiddos about, so how do you understand what we're going through right now? And what do you feel like you know about what's happening and what might happen? If you haven't asked those kinds of questions, and I'm guilty of, being frustrated about what I hear on the news as much as listening and absorbing, etc. If we haven't had those conversations, it's time to have them, right? Because your kid might look okay, and your kid might only be expressing, frustration over not being able to hang out with their friends and those kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other sources that are causing an emotional response that they're just not saying out loud, right? So having those conversations, I think, is important. And that leads us to the last piece, and we started to get into this, which is empowering them, right? So empowering them on a lot of fronts, but especially on the front of their own learning. And I feel like I've heard a lot of this out there, so we'll just reiterate it. And then again, any final thoughts on it before we turn to what you're doing with your own families right now. But this idea that, as parents, we have to cut ourselves some slack. Nobody expects your kids to be sitting, at the dining room table, the picture of perfect learning from 8 a.m. in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You heard from Cheryl and Meredith and Rebecca, some ideas about ways to engage them in learning that aren't deliberate learning exercises. They're just getting them thinking, right? For me, I've said a couple of times on Facebook Live videos, if your kid's not vegging on a device all day, call it a win, right? If at any point during the day you took them away from that and you did something else, I don't care what it was, we're going to call that a win, right? And move on. And as we get into week 4 and week 5 and week 6, and we all know now that this is extending at least until the end of April, then sure, the more we can move them into, especially as their schools and their districts are providing resources, the more we can direct them to that. Obviously, that's wonderful. But we all recognize that you're also balancing your own jobs for many of you at home. Nobody expects you to be ensuring that your kids are meeting all the Common Core standards at this moment in time, right? Which is why we talked about some of the things we've talked about today. So letting your kids take the lead, letting your kids go find sources, asking your kids about the sources they're using, right? Letting your kid help determine the schedule versus you demanding that it has to be from this time to this time, right? Those are all ways to empower them. So anything to add to that empowerment piece, ladies, before we talk about what you're doing with your own families and wrap up? It's okay if not.
I think that parents and children together create a powerful unit, and that we should be, that parents and should be emphasizing that.
Yeah.
The cohesiveness of the unit, all in it together, that the empowerment is from the smallest child to the eldest in your family, and working it through and validating each other and validating kids and their fears and their boredom and their irritation at you asking them to sit down.
Exactly.
I mean, that's real. This is going to be a bump in most people's lives, you know, and unfortunately for some, it won't be. But for the great majority of people, it's going to be a bump. And for kids, smaller kids in particular, that in elementary and middle school, it'll all work out. It's all going to work out academically. It's not.
Exactly.
Everybody's going to make adjustments. We're all going to do that. So when the school starts again, we'll fix that, and I think it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Cheryl. I think that's an important message.
I'm sorry, and I would add as well, you know, the two pieces to that. One, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, I'm sure others can relate, but that feeling of before this, just on the go, busy, and now being forced into a situation where you have time to be reflective, have conversation, that conversation and learning, as a parent, learning what your kids think about things is so refreshing. And I think about it also with my students. It never fails, no matter what topic I'm teaching in the English class, no matter what novel, what genre, whatever. I have students that blow my mind with certain things that they think. And I always make sure to impress that upon them, that they in fact blew my mind with something amazing that they said. And that's empowering to kids, because so often, and I realize, gosh, do I do that with my own children enough? And this is forcing for me to sit down and do the same thing in my household with things like Cheryl mentioned, and movies, because they blow my mind naturally with what they know or what they think or what they came up with that I wasn't even in the ballpark of thinking. So expressing that to our kids, you know, at what level, whether it's Harry Potter or, you know, something else that they're reading, watching, whatever, and letting them know that, I think, is incredibly empowering.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Meredith. And I think too, I don't know about you guys, but what I've experienced with my own kids, and we have a 12-year-old still, you know, in home. We have a couple of kids in college, and then older kids, is that they're more tolerant of those conversations right now than they've been in a long time. Because like us, they're always way too busy. And so the first week of this, we were all really antsy and just kind of like, wait a second, this is a, you know, what do I do? Like, I'm used to going a million miles a minute and now I have to slow down. By the end of last week, the end of week 2, we were kind of starting to adjust to that. And I feel like part of that adjustment is that suddenly they're more tolerant of those conversations, right? If I ask them in the middle of them trying to, you know, scroll their social media in the 5 minutes of free time they have, you know, what do you think about that? I'd probably get, I don't know, you know, but now I feel like they've got the time to think, just like we do. So I think that's really, really huge. So last word, Cheryl, I'm going to start with you. Tell us one thing you're doing with your own families right now, your own family, whether it's to support learning, to maintain sanity, whatever it is, so that the folks who listen to this know what the educators are doing too, because it's not pretty in our houses, right? We're not pretending that because we're teachers, oh my gosh, it's all working out beautifully. It's not pretty, but we're coming up with some things to do. What are you doing?
Well, I live alone, and I am missing my three grandsons that only live 3 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
But I am isolated from them. And I have a very good friend who's an English teacher who I'm reading to the oldest via FaceTime. And we're reading Harry Potter.
Love it.
And so I asked, it's Meredith, no secret. I said, what do you think if I ask him to summarize what would be the best way? He's 7. I don't want to test his patience. And Meredith suggested, I said, would it be a good idea for me to order the illustrated versions and I could show it to him? And she suggested that I have him illustrate every chapter.
Oh.
And that's what we've been doing. And it's been a phenomenal thing. I read to him at night. The next day, during the day, his mom cuts out some time and he wants to do it, which is also a very good thing. He illustrates with a title what that chapter, what we read the night before, and then when we start the next night, he shows it to me and gives me a verbal summary. So it's just a win-win in so many levels of, I need the fix of my boy. He wants to see his Oma, and yet he's learning and thinking and processing, summarizing. It's a good thing.
I love it. That's a great one. Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate that. How about you, Rebecca? How about you?
Well, this isn't, I don't have a lot of like young people.
Whatever it is,
in
right.
my home.
Absolutely.
But here's something that I do that helps me feel connected is I send postcards. So it sounds kind of funny, but I am going through my address book and mostly to my cousins and my aunts and uncles, of which I have many, and some close friends that are all across the country. So that's just my personal way of connecting with people, is trying to send out. And now I just do it once a week. I try to send out 7. If you're listening, you haven't gotten one, I probably don't have your address.
I was going to say, what do we have to do to rank to get a postcard? I'm just curious minds. Wondering minds want to know.
The bar's pretty high, so sorry.
I see Cheryl and Meredith right now. They're both in tears on their ends because they haven't received a postcard yet. So it's upsetting.
So it's not rocket science, but I have a ton of old postcards at my house, so it's just kind of fun.
Love that. Thank you. That's a great one. All right, Meredith, last word.
So like I said, I have 2 teenagers in my house, and one is a high school senior. So once we got through the first week of, I call it the dark week in our house, where we could actually start to engage on a level of like, okay, this is our new normal. There's lots of TV on, there's lots of things going on. I'm impressed with the way my high schoolers, or my teenagers are finding ways to occupy themselves. But a lot like what we talked about. So usually at the end of the day, we'll put on a show, we'll put on a movie.
Yep.
And it goes back to earlier in our conversation, I think Cheryl said, like, it doesn't have to be, some Academy Award winning movie. I think the first one the kids put on was this horror flick called Ma. Literally the worst thing I've ever seen. And I remember thinking, what was the value of that? And of course, an English teacher, I go into, and my kids already know it's coming, I go into, what archetypes did you see in this movie?
Oh,
and,
gosh.
Stop. But just finding ways to ask about, in that case, it was like patterns. Well, that's going to happen because in every scary movie, it's this,
right.
But then a couple days after that, my son wanted to watch Jojo Rabbit.
Okay.
And this is a satirical movie based on World War II. And that brought up a lot of questions. And that was fun. Things I was able to ask them and just have conversations about. Yeah. And again, you don't have to be an English teacher to do that.
Right.
It was just things, I noticed like the color green was prominent in that movie. So I asked them, I said, hey, whoever can come up with, the best explanation for why the director used so much of the color green gets to pick dinner or whatever.
Sure, sure.
It could be anything, making games out of it, but just having conversations. Like I said a few minutes ago, just being able to talk to my kids, I realize they're so brilliant and they have so many great things to share. And it makes me slow down and appreciate something that feels really horrible at the moment, but yet when you look at it from that perspective, it's not.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Love that. Thank you. I appreciate the examples, you guys, because they're all very real. They're all stuff that any one of us could do. And, I'm going to take it back. I think it was Cheryl who said earlier, to wrap it up, that we are quite literally all in this together, right? Whether we're sitting at home isolated because we live alone, whether we're in a small family unit, all of us are more connected now to the world around us than we've ever been, which has its, blessings and its curses. And so how we can each step back and just say, okay, for our family, for our purposes, here's how we're going to try to be better on the other side of this, right? And it's in doing all the things that you guys have talked about. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences right now, and being a voice for folks. And I joke all the time, maybe 5 people are going to hear this, maybe 500 people are going to hear this. But regardless, there's no question in my mind the conversation that we just had is going to be beneficial to folks. So thank you so much for joining in on it.
thank you.
Of course, of course.